Hey guys, it is Wingy here and welcome back to a brand new Doctor Who Top 10. Now, I have done the worst of the classic series and I have also done the best and worst of the new series. Today I look at the best of the classic series. I'm not going to dally about, I'm just going to get straight into it, but two disclaimers first. As always, this is just my opinion, so if you happen to disagree then that is entirely fine. And two, this is probably the hardest list that I have ever had to do. This genuinely was. There's so much in the classic series that I just absolutely love, so to put just 10 on a list is really fucking hard. Even literally the minute before I started recording this video, some changes were made to my list. So about the ordering and whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's very malleable. You can swap the different stories. It doesn't matter if number 5, it shouldn't be ahead of number 10 or whatever. But without further ado, let's get into it. Kicking off my list is going to be the Dalek invasion of Earth. Now this story I really enjoyed. This is one of those stories that I think is probably the most iconic from the Hartnell era. In my opinion at least. Obviously An Unearthly Child is the first story, so it's iconic for that. The first Dalek story is of course very iconic as well. But this story I think not only has some of the most iconic imagery and plots and speeches and whatever from the William Hartnell era, but just from Doctor Who in general. First of all, I know it was a different time, but there's some things in this story that I am very surprised they got away with. Back in 1964 when this story was made, Doctor Who was considered a kids show, and yet they have a poster that says don't dump bodies in the river. The Daleks are really chilling in this story. It's probably, in terms of the portrayal of the Daleks themselves, probably one of my favourite stories. There's that moment where that guy tries to run and escape and then the Daleks slowly close around him and the Supreme Dalek just says kill him. Just the most casual thing in the world, just kill him. It's such a great moment. It is a bit long, it is a bit drawn out, but it's worth it. If you can get through it, it's fantastic. The idea of Daleks invading London seems like a casual thing now, but back then it must have been terrifying. Like, this story in a way is kind of like, what if the Germans had won the Second World War? But going back to the imagery, I mean, the Dalek coming out of the water is great. The Daleks trundling up and down in front of Houses of Parliament and Trafalgar Square just looks great. But then we get to the main thing that I really love about this story, and I think lots of people will agree with me on this. It's Hartnell's speech at the end. Hartnell delivers one of the finest performances that any Doctor has ever delivered. It's so heartfelt. We are so used to seeing him as this crotchety old grandfather type figure. He's still trying to keep that stern upper lip type attitude that the first Doctor does, but you can tell he's very emotional about it at the same time. There's a nice balance there in the way that he delivers that speech, and it is fantastic. One of the best. One of Hartnell's finest performances as the Doctor. And it's just a cracking good Dalek story. What more do you want? Next up, we're moving into the 1980s with a Colin Baker story. Ooh, controversial. Well, not really, because Vengeance on Barris is actually a pretty fucking good story. Not only does it introduce us to what I think to be the last iconic classic Doctor Who monster in the form of the creepy little shit that is Syl. I shouldn't do his laugh. That's not right. This story also is, I think, still relevant for today. I mean, what more could be relevant about people just glued to their TVs and they'll just watch anything? Or that the governments are doing dodgy deals behind the backs of their people and they're actually getting ripped off whilst they're doing that. You know, that sort of thing, that wouldn't happen nowadays, would it? And that's what I like about it. It makes it timeless. Even though the sets and the costume do date it, the message and the themes from this story are still relevant in today's society. Plus, this story is just grim. And I like that. Doctor Who needs to take this approach a lot more. I mean, when you have the cliffhanger of the Doctor literally dying, I mean, I know we get that a lot nowadays, but I mean, when he's crawling along the floor like he's running out of breath, he's dehydrated, it's just such a cruel image, and it really works for the setting. You also have the scene where they're hanging the Doctor, potentially. There's the famous acid bath scene as well, and Perry turns into a bird creature for some reason. That's the only thing that lets this story down, but everything else about it is great. If you're very skeptical about the Colin Baker era of Doctor Who, this is the one one story that I would tell you to watch because it is brilliant. It's been my favourite Colin Baker story ever since I saw it. Now, when I said that this list is very malleable and you can swap different stories around, it most definitely applies for this next story because I'm talking about Pyramids of Mars with Tom Baker. Now, yes, you could say that this story should be higher up the list, but at the same time, I guess the ordering thing, I don't just want a load of Tom Bakers or Peter Davisons at the top of this list. So I thought I'd put one here just to even it out a bit. So, Pyramids of Mars, flawless. Like no other, flawless, absolutely flawless. I didn't even edit that in, that was just live. Well, I say flawless. The one thing, if it's a nitpick that I have to say about it, Tom Baker's performance isn't the best. The reason for this, he didn't get on with the director, plain and simply, and his performance, it does show that he didn't really get on, he didn't really want to listen to her. Yes, in places, it does look dated. Mars, I think, looks crap. But the actual story itself is fine. Well, no, not fine. Excellent. Elizabeth Sladen is on fine form in this story. She's great. The fact that Sarah Jane uses a gun, and it's not explained how Sarah knows how to use that gun, I think that's brilliant. Not only that, the mummies, they look really cool. Marcus Scarman is one of the creepiest bastards that Doctor Who has ever seen. And who's the main villain in this? Oh yeah, he's alright. Nah, I'm just trolling. Sutek, fucking amazing. The best one-off villain Doctor Who has ever seen. I know he's been in audios, and I know that Gabriel Wolfe, I know that he returned in the David Tennant era to voice the Beast, but I sincerely hope to God that Sutek never returns to Doctor Who. And you may think, well, why? He was great. That's exactly why. Because he was so great, I don't want to see another classic series villain ruined by the new series. Not all of them have been. I'm not taking a shot saying that all of them are shit, but I just don't think that Sutek needs to come back. I think he was perfect in Pyramids of Mars, and you don't really need to revisit that. He is completely in control and so chilled out throughout the entire story. That scene with him and the Doctor where he's saying, "You are nothing but an ant," it gives me chills every single time. I'm 22 this month. It still gives me chills and creeps me out. It's great. I know it should be higher up on the list, but I just want to spread the stories out a bit. And now we move to a story that originally was not on this list. What changed my mind was that I watched it a few days ago, and I thought, I've got to put this story on my list because I prefer it to what was originally here. And it's kind of bittersweet in a way because it's Survival, the last ever story in the classic run. In a way, it's a new beginning, and that's what I love about it. If you're a fan of the new series, in particular series 1 and 2, and you really like Rose's story, go and check this story out. There's so many different elements in this story that are very reminiscent of things that have come later on. People say that the TV movie is the gap between the classic series and the new series, but not as much as this story is. Now, the Cheetah people do look shit, I will say that. Well, no, not shit, just not that good. But then again, it was the late 80s, what do you expect? The rest of this story is great. It's really well paced, there's an element of mystery there, and this for me is Anthony Ainley's finest performance as the Master. He doesn't really camp it up in this story like he usually does. I think in this story he finally plays the Master the way that he wanted to. I guess a nitpick is that I wish the Master was in this story more just because of how good he is, but I can't get annoyed at what I see because he's fantastic. He's not in more scenes or less scenes than he needs to be. He's in it the perfect amount. I just wish there was more, and that's a good thing. You do want more of him. It's only 3 parts as well, so it's not that long. There's some really cool stuff with Ace in this story as well that I was actually very surprised by. Well, no, not surprised by. If you follow her story, you can kind of see it coming, but I think it really comes to a head in this story. Considering that this was the 1980s and it was a very different time, there's a lot of lesbian subtext here. And for 1989 and Doctor Who, that's very progressive. It works perfectly. The subtext here is brilliant. You kind of get a hint of it, but it's not at the forefront. Really great story. McCoy's on fine form. It's just a bittersweet end to Doctor Who. Because after the stuff that they're kind of setting up and hinting at in this story, season 27, I imagine, could have rivaled that of season 13, which is what I think is the best season of Doctor Who of all time. It's just such a shame we never really got to that. Next up, we're going to the Pertwee era with the Sea Devils. I love this story. There's so many things in this story that every time I think of them, I just get happy because I'm like, oh yeah, that was great. Oh yeah, that was great. I love this bit. The Sea Devils, as a monster, are probably one of my favourite designed monsters of the entire Doctor Who classic run, or just Doctor Who in general. I think they have some really cool moments. I like the way that moment where they're coming out of the sea and then they chase the Doctor and Joe through the minefield and the Doctor detonates it, and the cry that the Sea Devil lets out, it's just, you do feel sorry for it, but you're just like, yeah, fuck off back to the sea, you weirdo. Another thing that I love in this story as well is the relationship between the Doctor and the Master. You get hints of it in other stories, but no more so than you do in this one. After the events of season 8, where the Master is involved in every single bloody story, the Master is now in prison. The Doctor and Joe go to visit him for some reason. I don't know why they would, but yeah, they do. And there's a real underlying level of respect there. Like when the Doctor leaves, he goes to shake the Master's hand and then thinks, ooh, No, maybe not. But I love that. I love the fact that even though they are bitter enemies, they still have respect for each other. It's so subtle, but it's great. The main issue that I have with this story, though, is it retreads a lot of ground that they set up in the Silurians. It's a very similar story. I think they address it in it as well, but it's not the most original story. I just think it's a more concise, more focused version of the Silurians, but instead of them being under the earth, they're under the sea. I can't think of another Pertwee story to put ahead of this one on this list. Time Warrior, I think, is great. Frontier in Space, I think, is an underrated gem, as is the Ambassadors of Death. I really love the Three Doctors, but I just think of this and I'm like, yeah, I can't beat this story with any of the other Pertwee stories. This is the ultimate Pertwee story. It's got Unit in it, it's got the Master in it, it's got a great secondary monster in it, and it's got a really fucking good story in it. That's all you need to know. Check it out. Also, it is the one story where the Third Doctor says, reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. In his era, at least, that is the only time he says that. He says variations of it, but the Sea Devils is the only time he says reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. Little fun fact for you there, even though you probably already knew it. Next up, we're heading to another Unit story now, however with a different Doctor. We're talking about The Invasion with Patrick Troughton. Why did I say it like that? What the fuck? We're talking like Jeremy Clarkson now for no apparent reason, but fuck it, I'm leaving that in. Yep, The Invasion, Pat Troughton, really good story. Now, I could have put the Tomb of the Cybermen on here, but I didn't. Reason being, I find myself revisiting this story more so than any other Patrick Troughton story. I think the main issue that I have with it is that it is a couple of episodes too long. But having said that, I watched this story when I was very young. Well, a lot younger than I am now. And what I found was I was never ever bored during this story, even though it is 8 parts long. An amazing Cyberman story. Probably some of the most iconic imagery that the Cybermen have ever had. I said some of, not all, by the way, in case someone gets really keyboard happy in the comments. I said some. You have the stuff with St. Paul's Cathedral, you have them coming out of the sewers, you have where they're hatched as well. That first scene where you see them just drag open the cloth. It's not supposed to be cloth, but their cocoon, as Tobias Vaughan calls it, who is a great villain, by the way. A great secondary human villain. Kevin Stoney as Tobias Vaughan has got to be my favourite human dickhead that Doctor Who has ever seen. He's so good. Patrick Troughton as well. He's one of my favourite Doctors, man. Like, he is so good. He's probably my 3rd favourite Doctor behind Tom Baker and John Pertwee. Oh no, Peter Davison I really like. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's great. This story was also a test run. The BBC knew that next year they were going to have the Doctor predominantly on Earth with Unit. This story sets that up. This is the first time you properly see Unit in Doctor Who. This is the first time, well, it's not the first time he appeared, but it's the first time that Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart appears as the Brigadier, as last time he was a Colonel. We see Sergeant Benton for the first time, although he's a corporal in this one, I think. But it's kind of a shame in a way, because I really like the dynamic between Patrick Troughton and Nicholas Courtney and all of Unit. I really wish we could have seen a bit more of that. The Cybermen, like I said before, they have some really iconic moments in this story, and I think design-wise, probably one of my favourites. Cybermen really great in this story. Even though it is 8 parts, you can get through it dead easy. It is definitely worth sitting down and investing your time in this story. I know there's a lot of long, drawn-out stories in Doctor Who. This is most definitely not one of them. It's not only atmospheric, it's creepy, it's paced very well, you have some standout performances. Like with a lot of stories of Doctor Who, it sets up the next era, so it's worth watching for that. One of my favourite Cyberman stories of all time, and if you watch my channel, you know I fucking love the Cybermen. They are the best Doctor Who villain of all time in my eyes. And I would say you can't get any better than the Cybermen in this story. However, we're moving on now. Next up, we're talking about one of the most iconic, infamous, just brilliant stories of Doctor Who history, not only for Cybermen, just in general, Earthshock. Now, this story is the second classic Doctor Who story that I ever saw. It was also my introduction to the Cybermen, and my god is it a good story to watch. I fanboy over this so much. It is the best Cyberman story. The Cybermen haven't been on screen for 7 years. Last time they appeared was Tom Baker's first season. So say you're like 10 years old, you've never seen them before. The title doesn't give it away. They cancelled the radio times so they don't give the surprise away, and then you're sat watching. You've kind of heard about the Cybermen, and bam, that cliffhanger comes in.
Destroy them! Destroy them at once!
It's just so fucking good. Part 1 is really unsettling. Now, in context of the story, why do the Cybermen need androids? Doesn't really make sense. They're literally only there for the big reveal. But all the stuff with them in Part 1 is really unnerving, it's really unsettling, you don't really know what's going on. Cybermen at the end of Part 1, they're there, and then the story carries on. Now, the design of these Cybermen, my all-time favourite, I absolutely love them. People say that these Cybermen are way too emotional, and to a point, I do agree with that, but I think David Banks, who plays the Cyber Leader, he is too too good, I can just let that pass. The rest of the story is kind of a base under siege. It's not really a base, it's a spaceship, but it's still a really cool way to do things. Peter Davison is on fine form in this story. The whole thing of where he's talking to the cyber leader about emotions doesn't fully make sense. Eating a well-prepared meal? Really, Doctor? Not your best. Adric in this story, I mentioned this in my worst Doctor Who companion video. He's very good in this story, except for the whole... His death has a real emotional weight at the end of this story as well. I mean, not in Time Flight, the next story, which is set 2 seconds after this. I don't like the silent end credits though. I think that's a bit cheesy. But other than that, that's the only real nitpick that I have with Earthshock. Everything else about it is just perfection. It is the ultimate Cyberman story in my eyes. It's one of Peter Davison's best. It's one of the best of the 80s. For me, it's the best Cyberman story, like I just said. And I think it's one of those stories where if you say you're a Doctor Who fan and that you love the Cybermen, if you haven't seen this, I will question that. You have to see this story. Taking my number 3 spot now is City of Death. Now this is one of my all-time favourite Tom Baker stories. I absolutely love it. I think this is one of those Doctor Who stories that I could just watch it over and over and over and over and over. Tom Baker's era, for a lot of people, it does take a dip in quality, and I would agree with that. But then when you see a story like this, it's just a complete return to form. There isn't anything about this story that I would pick out as a bad thing. Literally everything about this story is great. Scaroth, the villain, great. His plan, complicated but great. Julian Glover, who plays him, fantastic. Catherine Schell, really great supporting actress. Duggan, the companion that got away, I would have loved to have seen Duggan join the Doctor and Romana in the TARDIS. Bye bye, Duggan. It's the best way to end an episode of Doctor Who. In fact, I often find myself shouting bye bye Duggan for no necessary reason. The Doctor is hilarious in this story, but this is the pinnacle of Tom Baker as the 4th Doctor. He does that thing where he's humorous, witty, he's acting stupid, and he's doing this as a way to distract his enemies, so then he just switches completely and he's the Doctor. He's all serious and he's in control of the entire situation, and you realise he has been throughout the entire time. The moment that I mean in particular, the moment where he first goes to the chateau. I say, what a wonderful butler. He's so violent. Such a great Tom Baker moment. Romana doesn't get a lot to do in this story, but it doesn't really matter. It's plotted so perfectly, like every little detail about the plot just unravels, and it's almost like a trail of Smarties that you're following. You're just satisfied as you're going along. You just get little tidbits all throughout the story. The location filming, absolutely stunning. Paris looks incredible in this story. The cameo from John Cleese as well, brilliant. This is one of those stories that you just have to check out. If you're a fan of the 4th Doctor, this has got to be one of his best stories, arguably his best. Now these next 2, it was really hard for me to decide. They kept chopping and changing in my mind which one was number 2, which one was number 1. Oh, I prefer this one. Oh, I'll go for that one. No, I prefer that one again. I'll switch it back. I can't decide. It was really difficult. I'm gonna be a cop-out here, and I'm gonna have a joint number 1. So the first number 1 story on this list is Genesis of the Daleks. This isn't an arguably, if you have not seen Genesis of the Daleks, do not call yourself a Doctor Who fan. This is quintessential Doctor Who. This story, similar to City of Death, is perfection. The only thing, and it's a nitpick, it's a bit long. It gets a bit slow in the middle. That is the only problem that Genesis of the Daleks has. Considering that some people would say, Doctor Who's just a kids show. Look at the stuff in this. This is so intelligent and well thought out for kids TV. It is impeccable. The main complaint that I see people have with Genesis is that there aren't enough Daleks in it. That doesn't bother me, because the story isn't really supposed to be about the Daleks as we know them. It's about their creation. It's how they came to be. It's how the Khaled society just fell so flat on its arse because of nuclear war that the only solution that they had to end this pointless war was for a mad scientist to make his people into these hideous little mutant creatures and put them into tanks. The Nazi imagery in this story, I mean, it's not even subtle, but it's done so well that you don't care. Now, I mentioned Tobias Vaughan before in The Invasion. Nyder is a close second. He is such a slimy, wormy little bastard. I love Nyder in this story. Well, I love to hate him. Michael Wisher as Davros. Now, I don't know if I prefer him or if I prefer Julian Bleach or if I prefer Terry Malloy, because I don't think anyone has played Davros badly. Oh, David Goodison. But what I will say is that Michael Wisher is absolutely fantastic in this story. The thing that really gets me about Davros in this story, the way that Michael Wisher delivers his lines. He's saying the just most crazy and outlandish stuff, and he somehow makes it sound reasonable. But the whole thing of, if you had a virus, could you then release it? And he just goes, yes, I would do it. And you think, Jesus Christ, there is no reasoning with this man. The Doctor is put in a really tough decision in this story. It's one of the most iconic moments from it. Do I have the right It's one of the most brilliant scenes in Doctor Who history, and it really makes you question the Doctor and Sarah Jane in that scene. Sarah Jane saying, we're talking about the Daleks, the most evil creatures in the universe. You must destroy them. You must complete your mission for the Time Lords. It's a real moral dilemma. Like, what would you do if you were in that situation? Could you destroy the Daleks, but you yourself would be worse than them in that situation? Or do you take the moral high ground and let millions of people and planets die and suffer because of it? Kids show my arse. This is one of those stories where it's just untouchable. I know it's one of those stories that everybody talks about. You could argue that it is overrated, but you can't deny how great it is. It just is. It's just quintessential Doctor. It's just fantastic. It's more or less flawless. Nobody puts in a bad performance. Not one person. But the way that the story is written itself, it is so interesting and so intriguing to see how a society could collapse that far. Now, my other number one choice is another very obvious choice. The Caves of Androzani. I'm not going to beat around the bush. You knew it was coming. Now, again, you could argue that this story is really overrated. And I can see where some people are coming from. I think, again, it's one of those stories where it just has one big problem with it, and that's the weird armadillo dragon thing. But I can look over that. The reason why this is a number one choice is because Peter Davison gives the most heroic Doctor-like performance ever. In terms of the heroism that the Doctor shows in this story, he needs to do it more. This story is a lose-lose situation. There is no victory here whatsoever. The basic premise of this story is the Doctor and Perry land in the wrong place at the wrong time. They need to get the fuck out of there as fast as possible. No one is really on their side. Every single party in this story, whether it's Sharaz Jek, whether it's Morgus, whether it's the Gunrunners, the military, they are all out for themselves and they all meet horrible ends, and you're so glad of it as well. Sharaz Jek is probably one of the creepiest Doctor Who villains, and similar to Sutekh, he should stay as a one-off villain. I mean, he does die at the end of this, so I don't think we can see him again. He is so brilliantly played by Christopher Gable. He's so creepy and pervy, and yet at the same time, you can't help but sympathise with him. I think one of the best moments in this story, just to emphasise how much of a creepy shithead he is, that moment where he's just touching Perry and stroking her hair, and you just hear her whimper. She's absolutely terrified of this guy. Morgus does this weird thing where every now and again, this happens. The plan has not gone my way. Or he'll say some bullshit like that. It's very weird. I don't know why they did it. It works though. When you first watch this, it is quite distracting, but it's still cool. Parts 1 and 3 have the best cliffhangers of all time. Part 1 is a cliffhanger where you think, hey, how the fuck are they going to get out of that then? Whereas part 3, you just think, oh shit. Shit! I love the cliffhanger to part 3. I think the best thing about it isn't necessarily the cliffhanger itself. It's fantastic, but I think it's the bit just before it. You see the Doctor at the controls. He's shaking himself off. You see these weird squiggles, you're like, oh, hang on, what's happening there then? He's holding back his regeneration. He made sure that he didn't regenerate just so he could save his friend. Holding back that regeneration in the first place is why he said he's not sure if he's going to regenerate. He was so selfless and heroic. He held back his own fucking regeneration so he could save his friend who he barely even knew. Something the 10th Doctor would never fucking do. Oh, it's not fair. The Doctor needs to be played in more ways like that. The heroism that he shows, it's just, you can't top it. And it's one of those rare occasions, like I say, it's a lose-lose situation. That needs to happen more. We need to see the Doctor lose more. We need him to be vulnerable more, because you end up with a story like this that feels like absolutely nothing else. I tell you, it's a huge compliment to Graham Harper, the director. He's the only classic series director to direct some of the new series. Bob Holmes, who wrote this is his finest script. Bob Holmes has written some of the greatest Doctor Who stories of all time, but you can't top this one. Everything just comes together. Everything just falls into place. It's such a dark, grim, horrid story, and yet you are hooked from the beginning of part 1 until you see Colin Baker at the end of part 4. It has to be joint number 1. I couldn't decide between this and Genesis. They are both fantastic in their own right. And that's going to be all from me. I hope you guys enjoyed this list. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with my choices? What else would you have put on this list? What would you have taken off this list and swapped instead? Either way, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like on it. And if you want to see more Doctor Who related content on my channel, then make sure you subscribe. I think I'm very close to 100 subs now. That's mental. That's really fucking mental. And if you do that, I would love you forever. But until next time, guys, take care of yourselves. Goodbye. Does everybody like my Rowlet, by the way? That was so weird. I need to grow up. I seriously do. I'm talking about Doctor Who and holding a Pokemon. I'm 22 this month. This is unbelievable.